about what you need to know about your thyroid. So I'm excited about this because I think it's something that a lot of women struggle with or wonder if it's an issue for them, and they want to go get tested, but they're not quite sure what they need to look for. So we're going to dig into all of that, what the symptoms are, what tests you should look for, and what you need to know. My guest today is Sarah Rule, who excuse me, I can't talk today, who holds a BS in nursing and a BS from Samuel Merritt University and Michigan State University. She is a registered nurse in the state of California and is currently practicing as a certified health coach, having graduated from FDN. Yay! Good. Fellow FDN here. She focuses on helping women who are struggling with hypothyroid symptoms and is determined to dig deeper to find out why her clients are experiencing the symptoms they have. She works to give her one-on-one clients the education and tools they need to self-heal so they can regain their energy, achieve their ideal weight, renew their mental clarity, and more so they can reignite confidence in their bodies and feel energized again. I just love that. So welcome, Sarah. So glad you are here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So share a little bit about your story, because like most people who end up in the functional health world, there's usually some sort of personal struggle that we've been through that really prompted us to get here. So can you share a little bit about what that was for you?
Absolutely. And to tell you the truth, I have yet to meet somebody that's in this world that hasn't had their own personal health struggle. So for me, it was kind of a combination of things. I was trying to get pregnant, and I, went through a series of tests and ultimately found out that my TSH was out of range, indicating that I had low functioning thyroid. And so at that time, my doctor said to me, I was like, well, why? This is even before I got into this whole functional realm. My brain immediately went to, well, why? What would cause this? And she said to me straight up, well, you're getting older. And I'm like, but I'm not even that old yet. And she goes, well, just take this thyroid medication. I'm on it too. It's all fine. You'll be fine. And I walked away just like my head was reeling. And honestly, that kind of started this whole thing where I started digging a little bit deeper, and kind of simultaneous with that situation, I decided to do a career change and went into nursing. And I became, as soon as I got into my clinical rotations, I was going home at the end of the day, like really deeply disturbed. I was like, there are so many people in these beds that they don't need to be here, and all I was doing was passing out medication, passing out medication. And, we were trained in nursing school to help educate people and, teach them how, they can have better lifestyle choices. But it just didn't seem to be what was happening at the hospital. The patients didn't even seem receptive. And so my own journey along, my own health journey along with being in this role and seeing it firsthand, I was just like, I'm going to have to take this to a different level for myself, And so one, I started really digging deeper for my own health. And two, I decided, I did obviously complete my my nursing school and became a registered nurse. But then I decided to become a health coach and focus more on helping people really before they get to that point where they're like in these hospital beds. So anyway, as far as my own health journey, part of what brought me to become an FDN practitioner was I even was going to like naturopaths and other doctors and still not getting any traction. And I came to the realization, if I don't figure this out, no one's going to help me. And so that's where I am now. And I've been super successful in alleviating my thyroid is like not perfect where I want it. I know this is a journey, but it's come so far. My symptoms have come so far. And kind of the struggle in this has helped me realize that it's never just one thing. It's never just like there's this magic pill, or it's like, oh, it must be this thing. It must be because I'm not getting enough sleep. And while we know that's super important, there's the not enough sleep. There's like what's underlying. And it's never the same for one person as another.
I love that. Yeah. Oh
So,
my gosh, thank you for sharing that. And your comment, it's never one thing. I just want to expand on that really quickly because so much of what happens in our body is so deeply interconnected. I'm just going to go on like a really short rant really quickly about things that are toxic in our environments and our lifestyle because agencies will come out with, levels of these substances that are quote unquote safe to ingest, or safe to be around or whatever. And we just trust that. We think, okay, well, it's safe, it's cool, it's fine, whatever. And in my mind, if something is listed as toxic at any level, then it's not safe for me to consume or to be around because here's the deal. You're not just around that one toxin, and like, for example, if you're getting the exposure of glyphosate in cereal, breakfast cereal, and, one serving is over the amount that is considered safe for children to eat, nobody's measuring just one serving. And that's not the only exposure to that food group that you're going to have throughout the day or throughout the week. And then you're going to be exposed to other chemicals and other toxins, whether it be from, your hair care or your cleaning products, or even if your home is spotless, going and being around other humans,
mhm.
living in the world that we live in. So, when we think about, what contributes to our health and what contributes to disease, it's never just one thing, 100%. And so I think, my personal approach to these things is to be excessively proactive, because you're never going to be able to control everything. And so what you want to do is get your body to that point where it's not constantly burdened and it can actually do what it's supposed to do when it's exposed to these toxins and flush them out, right? So I
Mhm.
love that. I love that you said it's never just one thing, and everybody is very different. Some people have like these incredible detox systems, and they're like, my husband is such a great example. He like gets exposed to the same things I get exposed to, and he's like, I'm fine all the time. And I'll be like, I smelled this and I have a headache. I can tell that there's a chemical in this room and it needs to go away right now. So
Yeah.
everybody's so totally different. So can you tell us, so you mentioned, your symptoms have greatly improved and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Specifically, you specialize in thyroid health. Usually we specialize in things that we've had personal experience with because that's where we get like super deep and interested. So what are some symptoms around like what does the thyroid do? Why do we need to care about the thyroid? What are some symptoms that people might recognize if it's not working, functioning properly, that sort of thing?
So the first thing is your thyroid is located at the base of your neck, and it is a tiny little butterfly-shaped gland that people oftentimes might not even know what it is. But here's the thing: every single cell in your body has thyroid hormone receptors. So that right there is a huge indicator as to how important this gland is, the hormones from the gland, and if things aren't functioning right, people can experience hair loss, dry skin, um, PMS, mood swings, brain fog, irritability. Um, those are pretty much even joint pain. A lot of people, when things get more extreme, like people just talk about even depression, not wanting to get out of bed. So, I mean, like if some people that may have a lower functioning thyroid may just only notice a few of these and not think that it's that big of a deal. But then the problem is then they are not addressing it,
Mm.
right? And so then things tend to proliferate. Um, and so, like when I was referring, my hair was definitely thinning. I definitely was having some fatigue. Fatigue is a big one, and I wasn't that old, so I shouldn't have felt like I was, in my 70s.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, those are just some things to look out for and be aware of that people wouldn't necessarily attribute those to thyroid function.
I feel like I've seen people talk about hair loss, and it's definitely one of those things it freaks women out, right? Like the hair starts thinning, or they start getting balding patches, and I know some people like really don't know what's happening, and they are so worried about it, and they're going to their doctors, and they're not like getting answers for why their hair is falling out, or maybe they do get on some medication, but it's not growing back. So, are you saying that this is a symptom or a side effect of poor thyroid health that actually can be reversed or improved?
It can be. So that's one of the reasons why you want to dig a little bit deeper than the TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. That's kind of what most doctors view the as the gold standard test. However, there are a handful of other markers that are really important that help us to be able to kind of peel back those layers and figure out what might be behind it, and then start taking steps to improve functionality.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, I work with a lot of my family members, and one of them got this concierge doctor where you pay a certain amount of money and you can see them whenever you want to and ask for certain testing and that sort of thing. And I was like, okay, great. Hopefully this is a good situation, right? And so I recommended a thyroid panel, a full thyroid panel, and they came back with like 2 markers. I was like, she did not do what we asked. This is not, like it's only somewhat helpful. I need like the other markers. So can you maybe explain, first of all, what are the other markers so that if somebody's listening, they can write those down and hand them to their physician and request a full panel? And then why do we need to see a full panel? Why is that important? What are these markers show us, that sort of thing?
Yes, definitely. So this is something that I'm super passionate about. So I'd love to share this. And I have some notes here so I don't get like really off track. But obviously the one that your doctors will run is the TSH. And that, as I said, that's the thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's going to measure. So it's a hormone produced by the pituitary gland, which then tells the thyroid how much thyroid hormone to make. And that's based on how much it perceives is already in the blood. Okay. So it's going to create a majority of T4, but some T3, and the T3 is actually the hormone that is the active hormone that ultimately T4 converts to. Okay, so that's just TSH. Then the others are total T4, and that's the total amount of T4 in the blood, both bound and free. And then total T3, that's obviously the total T3, both bound and free. And then there's free T4, that's the T4 that is available to be converted to T3. And then there's free T3, that's the amount of T3 that is unbound and available for your cells. As you remember, I said every cell has those hormone receptors. So that means the free T3 that's available to be used by the cells. And then reverse T3, and this is a really tough one to get run. And some doctors think that there is absolutely no reason to run reverse T3. However, reverse T3 is basically the opposite of T3. Okay, so it kind of puts the brakes on. And obviously you do want some reverse T3. You don't just want T3 getting out of control. But when we're suffering with these symptoms of hypothyroid, typically it's because we don't have enough T3. Maybe there's a problem converting from the T4 to the T3, or maybe just not enough is being created. But then if you have too much reverse T3, then that's really going to slow down metabolism and kind of negate the effects of the T3.
So you mentioned hypothyroidism. So you're talking about a slow underproducing thyroid versus hyperthyroidism, which is when they're making excess hormones, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And then another great one that you really should have run, especially if, you just should have it run, because is it's the antibodies, the thyroid peroxidase antibodies.
TPO
and TGB. So both of those, and those really should be non-measurable. So these antibodies, if they're there, that is potentially an indication of Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid autoimmune condition.
Okay, so which demonstrates that?
Pardon me?
Which antibody did you say indicates that?
So you want to check both the thyroglobulin antibody and the thyroid peroxidase antibodies, both of those. So both of those will give you some kind of an indication if there is basically your body attacking your thyroid.
Mm.
And about, well, at least 80%, kind of depends on who you ask, of hypothyroid cases are a result of Hashimoto's, the
Mm.
autoimmune condition. So,
Mm. So I would say then I would because autoimmunity it's first of all pretty significant issue that we want to avoid if possible. And secondly, once your body behaves that way and knows how to behave that way, you can manage it, you can do all these things to live your life, but you really can't ever, quote unquote cure it. Your body just that's what you have. So I would think then that this is something to not ignore. I think you mentioned earlier, you may have some mild symptoms that people don't really, think are necessarily a big deal, but it is in terms of you want to address things at the beginning so that it doesn't get more significant and impact your life in a bigger way. And Hashimoto's is just one example of that possibility.
mm-hmm. Yep. That's so true. And not to mention that, like, Hashimoto's can also be there's a high correlation between people with Hashimoto's and celiac disease and just other autoimmune conditions. So it's definitely something that has to be addressed.
So, obviously we said nobody is exactly the same and everyone's lifestyle factors and genetics are different, but what do you feel like are some contributing factors to that maybe have a negative impact on the thyroid?
Well, definitely. So hypothalamus pituitary axis dysfunction, HPA. I hate just throwing out acronyms if I don't say what they are, but HPA axis dysfunction is a big one behind it. Gut health is another really big one. Environmental toxins, just these other, gut pathogens, all of that can be behind it. If you're inflammation, if you're eating foods that are not that you have sensitivities to, those can actually contribute to the kind of the cascade of all of this. Blood sugar imbalances, all of this can throw things off. One of the big things in the gut is where T4 is converted to T3. So if there's a high level of gut dysbiosis, there's an enzyme in the gut that's responsible for this conversion, and that ends up getting decreased.
Mm.
So, and then simultaneous with high levels of stress, now whether it be, mental, physical, emotional type of stress, that will drive up reverse T3. And as I mentioned when we were talking about the markers to test, that will, put the brakes on what the T3 is trying to accomplish.
Mm.
So,
brain basically communicating to our body to release different things. And so mental emotional stress becomes a really important component of that because your brain just interprets, what you perceive your environment to be, right? So if you are feeling super stressed, even whether it's, a reality or not, right? If you're feeling super stressed, your brain's going to communicate to your body the stress response. And so that would have an impact then as well.
yeah.
Mm. So, you mentioned blood sugar and food sensitivity, so it kind of sounds like food is a little bit of a big deal in terms of potentially either being a stressor or being something that can be supportive. Are there any major ones that you find are pretty common that either people should eliminate or people should bring in if they're concerned about their thyroid health?
Yes, definitely. So for sure, if you have Hashimoto's, no gluten and dairy. And if you don't, okay, so when I say if you don't have Hashimoto's, I just also want to preface this that somewhere between, and this is a large range, you know how I mentioned that you could, if you had the antibodies, you would likely have Hashimoto's. So somewhere between 11 to 34% of hypothyroid cases are never showing antibodies.
Mm.
With that do have Hashimoto's. So my point is, it's not a for sure thing that you don't have Hashimoto's. If those antibodies don't show up, what you need to do is you do need to, like, the first time you run a full panel, okay, take it for what it is. That's your baseline. You'll do some, healing, modalities or whatever. And then in maybe like 3 months, you'll test again, and you just want to watch and see what happens. So, I really recommend to anybody that's struggling with a hypothyroid issue to cut out the gluten and the dairy. And I actually even put them on like an autoimmune paleo type of diet for a month, just to like kind of get out some of the like high offending types of foods. And then we run a food sensitivity panel just to continue to help flush those things out. But the point of that is not to forever be like restricting. Obviously,
Right.
we want to be able to bring back items that aren't causing a problem. But if you do have an autoimmune, gluten for sure, it just has to be out. The other thing that's talked about a lot is goitrogenic foods, which can be inhibiting to the thyroid, which are like your cruciferous vegetables and things like that. And, I think honestly, people are pretty split about, goitrogenic foods aren't, that harmful or are. I tend to like lean toward cooking them at least.
Mm.
That kind of reduces, because there's so many health benefits from them, that if you cook them, you're getting those benefits without as much of a goitrogenic effect.
Mm.
So that's really where I would start.
What about foods that you found to be particularly supportive? I think there's a lot of talk with like AIP and things like that to bring in, organ meats and things that are like extra nutrient dense and nourishing. So have you found
Mhm.
any that are like, oh yes, this is very supportive, or I particularly like to recommend these top foods? Because I think too, when you're doing any sort of elimination, it can get really overwhelming, and it makes it a little bit easier when we actually are focusing not just on what we can't eat, but trying to bring more variety into our diet.
And that's just it. Keeping the variety is really important. The organ meats are huge. A lot of people don't really like them, so I do recommend. I believe it's by Paleo Valley. Their organ supplement is really helpful. And then one of the other things that I like to do is a micronutrient panel, just to see like what they're absorbing
Yeah.
as well, and make sure they're absorbing, and make sure that their levels of what they're needing, that they're actually getting. But and then where things are low, we do try to address with food, like pumpkin seeds are really good. But then, there are other things that you need, like selenium and tyrosine and things like that. But, you have to be cautious when can't just add a bunch of things on at once. And so I really try to get people to derive their nutrients from food.
Yeah, it's much harder to overdose when you're eating it in a whole food form. Your body, it comes with all these like other cofactors and other minerals and vitamins, and our body just kind of knows what to do with it, right? Versus if you were to take a concentrated supplement, you have to be a lot more careful. In terms of the gut connection too, when you're talking about mineral status and nutrient status, I would think it's extremely important to make sure that the gut is in a healthy place, because that's where we absorb our nutrients. And so when we are eating foods that are inflammatory, like some of the ones you mentioned, it's causing this chronic inflammation in our system. And even if you are eating these really healthy foods, in addition to that, you're probably not going to be absorbing them efficiently because those cells in your gut lining are damaged. And so it really is one of those things where I think we can't take a magnifying glass to one part of our body. We really have to take that whole body, whole life approach and be like, okay, I'm going to reduce inflammation, like you talked about, eliminating food sensitivities, and I'm going to work on healing the gut, and I'm going to bring in these nutrients, and then all of this is going to affect, my brain and my thyroid and my hormones, and it becomes this sort of cyclical thing. So I definitely love that approach. In terms of nutrients, you mentioned selenium. I know it's a really big one that a lot of people with autoimmune tend to be deficient in, and I was just questioning, like, what's the importance of minerals, in the thyroid? I know people talk a lot about iodine deficiencies and different things like that. So how important is it to do that kind of testing, or to, work on that, nutritional variety?
Well, with every test, and I know you know this, with every test, they all cost money, right? And so I really try to be careful with the tests that I throw out there to my clients. It's like, we really have to be clear on what are we trying to find out with this exactly. And, maybe some clients have more money or, income they're able to put toward this. And so some of these tests are like maybe more nice to have. But no matter what, so I guess what I would say to that is, if it's not something that we must have to continue on with the program, which is going to be, a nourishing program, which is going to be an anti-inflammatory type of thing, all that stuff we can just keep moving forward with, and, optimizing the gut function. That's going to be a big thing, right? So if they're eating well, and but not absorbing, as you know, they're not going to get the nutrients and vitamins and all that stuff. But if we can continue to nourish the gut and get that as well as we can, that's only going to increase and obviously provide better nutritional status. So it's like, I think it is important to run, but I don't always, force that upon my clients, because we sometimes have to pick and choose.
Sure.
And knowing no matter what, we're just trying to optimize, or just trying to do the best we can.
Right.
So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So with thinking about, avoiding certain testing, do you ever have people do something like an iodine patch test or anything like that on their skin? Or is that something that maybe is not a first line of defense type of thing?
I personally haven't done that. And again, like I actually have not supplemented with iodine. Not that they shouldn't do that, but I again try to get it in their diet, like with seaweed, and
Yeah, I was just gonna say, let's mention that. Yeah, you can eat it, which is great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I made this, it was Instant Pot. I just have to say, I'm so proud of it. It was an Instant Pot, kind of like fish broth. And in it was like kombu and wakame. And I'm like, full on getting my iodine dose. It was so delicious. And that's just the perfect example of not necessarily having to buy these expensive supplements and worry about, is it too much, versus getting it from the diet.
Yeah, I love that you do that, because I try to do that too, so I'm not overwhelming clients when we get like the HTMA test and we're looking at their mineral status, and they have low potassium and low selenium, and I'm like, well, you can get selenium from Brazil nuts, so just eat some Brazil nuts. Mm-hmm. You can get potassium from bananas and from coconut water, so try that, and mm-hmm. I think that's such a great way to do it, because one, I think people, especially people that are going through healing journeys, it can get really overwhelming if they're looking at a box of like 50 supplements, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And plus, we just get so many other benefits from taking that whole food approach. You're just getting so many other good things when you're eating the food in its natural form. So I think that's a really awesome way to do it, for sure, especially when somebody is going through a pretty significant healing process.
Yeah, agreed. And I've been there. Because at least this is for me, and I see this in others too. It's like, you start with a few supplements that you need, and then you hear about something, you're like, oh, that would be great, and then add that, and the next thing you know, it's like you said, you've got 50 bottles, and I want to gag. And I don't ever want to make my clients feel that way, because the ones that I do recommend, you probably need those at least for a little while,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the difference between just having one piece of the puzzle with getting like TSH the TSH marker, versus having what we call the full thyroid panel that shows all those other markers that you talked about. And I know that sometimes it's not, if you have a really awesome relationship with your physician, sometimes they'll just say, oh, okay, great. Well, I'm not sure you need this one, but if you really want it, I'll do it. But others may be a little more difficult. And so, where can they get this test? Would they go to you? Do they order it themselves? What do you recommend in terms of, basically being your own advocate and really pursuing the full picture?
Definitely. I love that question. So obviously I can help somebody for sure. I have the ability to run this lab, and then I can also help interpret it and, what could be the beginning of kind of a plan unfolding for you. But there are also like directlabs.com or something like that. You can actually go put together a test, whatever test you want, really, if you're really running into pushback from your doctor. And I mean, I personally have, I just did, because I thought I'm just going to see what she says. And she didn't want to do it. So, I just like to test them sometimes.
Because if you can get it covered by insurance, that's great. But
exactly. Yes.
Know that you're probably going to get a little bit of resistance to get the full panel.
Definitely. So there are ways to do it on your own, but then you're kind of in the position of like, okay, now I have this, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
And even if you, and I don't know I won't say that I know this for sure, but say for example, if your doctor is never really running these full panels, chances are if you then went and ran it on your own and you took it to your doctor and you're like, okay, what do I do now? They're going to look at the TSH and they're going to proceed with what they normally would proceed with based on that TSH. So you really do need, whoever it is, you need to find somebody that's going to be able to be knowledgeable enough to understand like the relationships between those different lab markers, what they could mean. When I was going over all that whole list of the markers, if some are high and some are low, or some are within range, those all mean different things. Okay. So you've got to get with the right person that can help kind of interpret that and dissect what you're going to do next.
Yeah, and I would say, just to sort of clarify, we're not anti-conventional medicine, but everybody specializes in different things. And really, when you go to your physician, what they're looking for is extremes, right? So they're going to look at this one number, and if it's really extreme, you're going to be heading towards thyroid disease and like all these different scary problems, right? And a lot of times that's going to end up in either really heavy medications or surgery or removal or, whatever it is. And that's their job, and it's necessary, and they want to look for these really crazy disease states. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they're not always looking for it, and it's okay. It's not, not their thing. They're not looking for optimal health numbers. And so there's just a difference in perspective there, where if you go over to someone like Sarah, what she's really looking at is a really a much smaller range of healthy numbers, because what you're looking for is not a disease state, but an optimized state. And those are just separate ranges. And so just to clarify to people, we're not, anti going to your doctor or anti getting it covered by insurance. But when you really are trying to get this different level of health, where you don't just want to, deal with symptoms until it turns into a serious disease state, but you want to address them really like immediately right when they start, and you want to optimize how you're feeling, and you're like, this just isn't normal, and I know something's wrong, then that's when you really need to find somebody that's willing to work with you to figure out what is going on. And someone like Sarah is going to not only take the full thyroid panel, but she's going to look at your lifestyle, she's going to look at your nutrition, she's going to look at like that whole world, whole life approach. And it's just a different perspective, because coaches like us just have more time to spend with our clients, and that's just part of the package deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a really key point. Is like these ranges that the doctors go by, those ranges are really created from people with one end of the spectrum of the disease to healthy people, and so these ranges can be very wide. Whereas, like Kylene was saying, where you really want to be is in this optimal space, but conventional doctors aren't going to really focus on that till something's like really outlying, right? So
yeah. So what would be some of I know we sort of touched on this earlier, but just to kind of recap, what would be some symptoms that people would, as they're listening, maybe perk their ears up and think, maybe I should run this panel. Maybe I should reach out and see where my numbers are at.
Yes, so definitely fatigue, weight, kind of unexplained weight gain, like, you're kind of doing all the right things.
You haven't changed
Um,
anything in the past 5 years.
exactly, and suddenly this is creeping up and nothing, you're beating it off with a stick and it's not going anywhere. Like I said, thinning hair, irritability, mood swings, joint pain, PMS. So those are kind of the main ones.
I'm going to ask a question. Does medication solve all of those problems?
No, it doesn't. And I know that from personal experience. It doesn't. And it's, how we said at the very beginning, there's just never, so there's never one thing, but then also there's just not like a one size fits all approach. And kind of the go-to for doctors is, a synthetic version of T4. But what if that person, and the doctor wouldn't know because typically they just run TSH, but what if that person, their T4 was fine, but their T3 was low, right? And then we're just giving them more T4. Then what?
Right. And then what are the factors that are, causing this in the first place? We really want to, sometimes medication is necessary, or sometimes, thyroid support is necessary.
Definitely.
But where we always want to come back to is why. Why is this happening in my body? And how can I optimally support this part of my body functioning in a high way, in a normal, healthy way, by maybe making some tweaks to my diet or my lifestyle or my stress levels, everything you talked about earlier. And sometimes that can have like an incredibly powerful effect for people. I mean, sometimes, like you mentioned, sometimes it's super simple. And if that's you, that's amazing. Sometimes it's a little more, complex. You got to peel back the layers of the onion. But man, is that not worth it when it comes to your health in the next 20 years of your life?
I believe it is. I sure do.
I would have to agree. So how can people, well, actually, let me ask you one more question before we wrap up. What would be like the top thing that you would want to leave listeners with, whether it be a tip or a thought about, their health? What would you like to leave people with today?
I think if any of the symptoms that we talked about are something that's been bothering you, don't sweep it under the rug, because I think in our world today, now side note, we're kind of like quarantined these days and we have more time to focus on it. But generally speaking, we're rushing from thing to thing, and the way we're feeling becomes our new normal. And so it might be easy to kind of brush it off. And so really what I like to say is, like, tune into your body. What are you feeling? And, if you go to your doctor, ask for this complete thyroid panel, and just to get a baseline of what's going on, and, under the hood, so to speak. And, if in your gut that something's not right, definitely pursue somebody that can help you. That's what I would say. I would say don't let it go longer.
Yeah. And I would have to say that about, regardless of what you're experiencing, if it is fatigue, if it is, constipation, if it is diarrhea, like if it's, anxiety or depression, it's not, they're common. Those are all common. Every single thing I just listed is common, but that doesn't mean it's normal. It doesn't mean it's healthy for you. It doesn't mean that you have to suffer with it. It doesn't mean that it's something that you can't support naturally. So I would encourage you to reach out and to, ask for support in those areas, and just start finding out ways that we can really give our body the tools that it needs. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Before we wrap it up, let's share with everyone where they can follow you. Do you have a website? Do you have a program? Do you have Instagram? Like, where can they connect with you?
Yes. So I'm getting better with social media. I now have Instagram. It's Rule Your Health Wellness. And I'm on Facebook under Sarah Rule. And my website is ruleyourhealth.biz. And you can reach me via email at sarah@ruleyourhealth.biz. And I do have, I have a very in-depth program specific to hypothyroid. And like I said, peeling back those layers and finding out what is the underlying cause.
Oh, that's so awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your passion
Thank you.
and for answering some questions today. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you, Kylene.